And I imagine you're seeing a full screen slides over here. I see Allison nodding.
Yep.
I can almost sense nodding from the rectangles. You can feel it when people are nodding behind the rectangles. So we're really excited to be here to talk about Observable. We do work for the company Observable, but we're not here to sell you anything. It's a tool that is free to use. And we're here to talk about how it can be a companion visualization tool for the analysis that you're already doing in R. I'm Mike Freeman. I'm a software developer here at Observable. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and my background in a few slides. And of course, this is Allison.
Hi, everybody. Allison. I'm a data scientist advocate here at Observable.
And this is our first workshop together. We've been having fun all week putting it together and excited to share it with y'all. I'm very open to questions throughout. If you want to raise your hand, we'll keep an eye on the chat as well. And of course, feedback is a gift. Any feedback you have sort of throughout, questions you have, places you want to take this workshop, it's of course designed for you all. So what do we hope you all take away in the next 3 hours? First is understanding how Observable fits into your existing workflow, so that you can use the tool alongside the analysis that you're used to. And after this overview, we're mostly going to be actively working together in what are called observable notebooks. In order to do that, we'll cover some essentials. And then Allison, I think you're going to do the next pieces. What are those steps you'll be walking us through?
Yeah, so then we're going to look at some translations. For those of you who have been working in ggplot2 or feel very familiar writing and building data visualizations using the grammar of graphics, we're going to learn how we can translate what we know from ggplot2 into Observable Plot, which is a really cool, and I hope you'll think, fun way to build first static data visualizations, but then we'll very quickly get into adding silky smooth interactivity in a way that I think feels very light compared to other ways that I've tried to create interactive visualizations before. So we'll be doing a lot of plot, and then and then Mike will be teaching us a little bit about ways we can share.
Yeah, we want to take those. We don't just want to have our visualizations on our own machines. Only useful, of course, when somebody looks at them. So we want to look at different ways that you can share. And then we imagine there'll be a chunk of time at the end. You'll have some time to work on a few little practice pieces throughout, but at the end we'll have some advanced techniques, some next steps. Also a good time if you want to start working with your own data and ask us some questions. We can do that at the end. Are there any questions before we get started, either by raising your hand or in the chat? Going once. Oh, I do see some things in the chat and some answers in the chat as well. Wonderful. So if you're going to be listening to us for a few hours or working with us for a few hours, we should take some time and talk about who we are. I currently work as a software developer at Observable, but it was not a classic route into that. I started out as a data visualization specialist and health researcher at a place called the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. You might have seen their COVID projections over the last few years, but they do a lot of descriptive global health research. And I was really excited by the part of the research process where I got to create interactive visual tools to share that analysis. That led me to an appointment at the University of Washington Information School, where I was teaching courses in interactive data visualization, amongst other things. And I got really excited about this software that I was using in my courses called Observable. And I was then lucky enough to transition over to working here at Observable. I originally joined, similar to Allison, as an advocate. I found myself building either interesting examples, as you might see in the bottom left over here. This is a notebook we'll take a look at later. But I really wanted to improve how the product itself worked. And eventually I was able to transition over to the software engineering side. And as an example, the bottom right here, we see a table with these summary charts at the top. I was working on different ways to do those summaries in notebooks, and then figured we should just give those, sort of for free, give those away in the product, show them by default. So I was able to build those small visualizations at the top of those columns as one of my first projects on the engineering team. And that has been a lot of fun. I'll turn it over to Allison to hear more about her route to Observable.
Yeah, so like Mike, I came to Observable after a decade in higher education. I was at UC Santa Barbara, where I was teaching data science, statistics, data analysis, and science communication courses at our School of Environmental Science and Management. And more recently, our new master's program in environmental data science. So a lot of what I was doing was teaching fundamentals of data science and stats and analysis so that people in our programs could build the skills that they needed to learn so that they could answer questions about the environment that impacts them and others and that they really cared about. So that was almost entirely in R, some Python, but most of my life for the last 10 years has been spent in R, both as a teacher, but also as a member of the R community. I co-founded Santa Barbara R Ladies back in 2018. I was R Studios, now Posit's first artist in residence in 2019 to 2020, and worked with a lot of folks in the R community to create artwork that makes different methods and packages and ideas more approachable and yeah, hopefully just a little bit more fun for people to engage with. I came to Observable just a couple months ago, really because my primary motivation the entire time I've been working with data, my whole data life. My goal has been to help people answer questions that they care about more easily and quickly and painlessly. And I'm really, really excited, that many of you today will be learning the things that I feel like are made easier in Observable without taking away any of the things that you love about your existing tools.
Allison, to put you on the spot a little bit, I do see some chatter already about your beautiful artwork. If people wanted to see more of the drawing, specifically about explaining different R packages and methods, could you put a link in the chat where folks can easily find that?
Absolutely, thanks.
And I'll just say, to be vulnerable in front of everyone, I'm very tickled to be teaching alongside Allison, as I was a big fan of hers before she joined Observable. So we're really in for a treat, and I think that this form of visual communication is a really powerful one. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, enough blushing. This is an important slide here. This is my dog, Ada. She likes to play foosball. She's not allowed in the bed, and she's very suspicious of anyone who might be looking at her. Also loves being in the sun. There's not really a reason. I think we have a small sample data set where we reference her later, but I just want to take any chance I can to show off pictures of Ada.
And this is Teddy. Teddy is not a good dog, but we love him dearly. And he tries his best always. He's really afraid of strangers, so sometimes puts on a very dramatic performance. But once you get to know him, has so much love to give. He's the best. Teddy loves hiking, punching us for attention, and chasing any squirrel or animal he can on the occasions when he's let off leash, which is often because we live in the middle of nowhere. And he's often my coding buddy when I'm writing and learning.
That's awesome. And this is also great. We should, Allison, do you actually mind putting a link to these slides, which I think should be visible for anyone in the chat? Because if at any point you're bored, you're concerned, maybe you're frustrated a little bit trying to learn a new thing, you can always come back to one of these slides of Teddy or Ada and get a bit of relaxing. And yes, Juan, I think after 4 years of using R, you get a dog. It just arrives in the mail.
Yeah. You write a function, like there's a function that's just like, I've earned my dog now, and it gets mailed.
Yeah.
And hopefully those slides work. So let us know. Let us know if any of these links don't show up, and we'll figure out the settings on them.
Yeah. And we'll sharing links and keeping track of them. Maybe at the end we can do something like put them all in the notebook, or we'll figure out a good consistent way to have links that lead to other links for you.
Cool.
All right, so that's our sort of overview and intro. This will be the most talking that we do for this first part, is we just want to give you sort of a high level picture of how we think Observable can fit into a workflow, particularly for people with a background in R who are actively working in R. Allison, how do you feel about R?
I love R so much. It makes me very, very happy to work in R. I spend a lot of time, have for the last 10 years, and continue to work in R all the time. Mike, how do you feel about R?
I love R. I spent a lot of time teaching R. I did a lot of health research in R. It is a fabulous piece of software. What are some of the things you think R is great for?
Yeah, I love doing my data wrangling and cleaning in R. I love dplyr, tidyr, janitor, a lot of great packages for cleaning.
Whoa. You say tidyr, not tidier?
Oh yeah, sorry. We could spend probably the next 2.5 hours. And I also say dplyr, and I'm not sure if that's gonna raise hackles.
What else would you say?
dplyr.
Oh my, well, that's why you shouldn't say tidyr. It's why you should say tidier.
Tidier?
Yeah.
Oh, now I'm having an internal conflict.
Yeah.
All right. I also think it's great for stats. I mean, that's what it was originally built for. So like the existing libraries that exist to do stats and modeling are really awesome. Yeah. Oh yeah. And we can't get out of here without saying that, like, one of the very treasured parts of working R is that every surface you own ends up getting covered in beautiful hex stickers from the community.
Which tessellate, right? The great thing about hexagons.
Yeah, very efficient.
Yeah,
shape.
don't try and make pentagon stickers. They're not gonna beautifully cover a surface.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think? What are some things though that might benefit from other tools?
Yeah, as much as R excels in those ways, when it comes to interactive visualization, it is cumbersome, obviously possible in lots of ways, but I think cumbersome to structure and sometimes cumbersome to use. It's difficult to do real-time collaboration, to be actively editing the same files, unless you can hook up VS Code to do synchronous mirrored work, but sort of the asynchronous pushing and pulling from GitHub can be challenging. Building the interfaces in which your interactive charts live, so your drop-down menus and your other sort of Chrome you have around your charts, and then sort of live sharing those results can be a challenge as well. Also providing feedback, sort of having this iterative feedback loop with the person creating the code or the people looking at the charts, this can be a challenge as well. Just as like a small side-by-side, the predominant way in which people do interactivity in R is by using this package Shiny, in which you have to define a user interface and a server, connect those up, and be really careful about the naming of your variables, and then the interface I'll get to the interface later, but that's sort of the code structure. And in Observable, we'll be walking through this, but a lot of these pieces are interconnected by default. That's the way that sort of the runtime of the notebook is structured, is you don't have to worry about explicitly tying these pieces together. And you're able to use a syntax that will introduce that sort of mirrors ggplot with another grammar of graphics library called plot. And then it's immediately live at a URL that you can share, as opposed to taking what you've done in Shiny and finding a place to host it. Again, these are all possible, but these are big friction points for me when I was using R and teaching in R. Quite challenging to debug those interactive applications. And then of course, sort of the output, because of the nature of a Shiny app where you have the sort of the message passing between your browser and an instance of R, and then it sends information back and forth. There was sometimes a lag, or it wasn't smooth, as opposed to what you have in Observable, where everything is living natively in the browser. Did you have other thoughts on that, Allison, of sort of that contrast, or other places that you've found a bit of friction?
No, just that there are folks have probably used some things like HTML widgets. You might have used like Plotly or giraffe, or crosstalk, which are really cool kind of ways that you can write in R while behind the scenes JavaScript is happening. So I think it's really exciting to also have the option to just like create things in JavaScript right from the start, and be able to see immediately kind of how it's working, and can debug it a little bit more quickly.
Yeah, and there's a comment about how we can now put Observable directly into Quarto documents. I think you've done that a bit more than I have. So any insights that you have on that, or things you want to mention?
Yeah, it is really fun. I totally agree. So for those of you who already have made maybe the jump from R Markdown to Quarto, if you haven't given a shot, you'll be surprised how much you already know how it works. But one thing that's really cool is that you can have OJS, observable JavaScript cells, right in a Quarto document alongside R cells and Python cells. So you can actually have observable JavaScript in there. One thing that you'll notice if you're working in Quarto is currently through our studio, you can't actually you can't execute the observable JavaScript cells right in our studio locally. You actually have to render the entire document, and then you can see the output in the browser. But what I have found, and I think we have some folks on this call who could probably chime in too, is that really the nice place to build and tinker and prototype and practice and get feedback and iterate on visualizations that you're building in JavaScript. Observable makes doing that really nice. So you can do your work. We're going to recommend working between both places, build the things in Observable where it's meant to be built and it's easy to build it. And then once it's kind of set, you can add that to your code chunks in your Quarto document.
Yeah, and I'll echo what Maya said in the chat. That also hi Maya. And Maya is does a lot of work with Observable and recently talked about R and Observable working together. And yeah, I think of observable cells as R Markdown code chunk, sort of an independent code snippet. And there's another question about the size of data tables and graphics. That's a really good question. So we'll see that you can upload a CSV file, or if you want to compress your data like a Parquet file into an observable notebook with a limit of 50 megabytes, but you can also connect live to a database and make SQL queries to that database or your Snowflake database. So there are a lot of sort of handled data connectors. Because it is at least Plot is rendering SVG elements, you're probably not going to want to render more than 5,000 or 10,000 visual marks in a chart. But from a visualization standpoint, you probably want to be doing some sort of visual aggregation. You likely won't want to actually see 10,000 circles. You want to do some sort of hexagonal binning or some other sort of computation before rendering those. But you do sometimes run into those limits. And no, sorry, TypeScript is only available yet, or I'm not sure if it is on the soon to be roadmap. Observable, a lot of the code base itself is written in TypeScript, but we don't support TypeScript in observable notebooks quite yet. So while there is this great way of getting OJS cells in Quarto documents, there's a lot of configuration to get started. We didn't want folks having to install and deal with things. We have a pretty simple suggestion here, at least for getting started. We're making the pitch that R is a great place for your data wrangling. It is certainly a fabulous place for your modeling to happen. And then you can take your data, you can take your output, drag and drop it up to Observable, and let Observable be the place that you do your visualization, your collaboration, your sharing. I'll make it some light pitches that you can do a lot of dplyr style data transformations in Observable as well. But what we want you to walk away from in this workshop is let R be this great home for doing the modeling and wrangling you already know and love. And let's show you a visualization tool that we think will complement that analysis really well.
Yeah, and I'll just give a shout out to Maya's talk from the Observable Insight conference that happened this week, where she talks about exactly this in more detail and really makes the case for like how these two tools complement each other. I think that those videos are going to be available next week sometime, so those will be available to share. But yeah, really great talk. Covers kind of this idea of how these two things can work together. We're definitely not trying to take away your R from you.
Definitely not. I don't think you could pay Allison to be giving a talk where she told anyone not to use R.
No, you couldn't.
Yeah, you couldn't. Me neither. I wrote a book about R. I like R.
Right.
I'm not anti-R. But there's enough love in our hearts for both of these pieces of software.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Yusuf had a question. So what would the data workflow be like? Yeah, what you're saying is like exactly what we're thinking. Although I'm learning more and more that you can do some wrangling and cleaning in Observable in JavaScript. There's a really cool package. If Mike didn't say the name, Arcaro is really awesome. But yeah, like for me, it would look like that, like clean my data in R. Once I have my cleaned up data set, then have it, make it available, drag and drop it over into Observable, do my exploratory viz, some basic analysis, some aggregation there. That makes it really easy to share, add interactivity to, and then I could continue answering my questions with analysis in R, or if the endpoint is visualizations to share, then we'll see ways that you can share those outputs from Observable that you've created.
Well, all this talking is making me really excited to make some observable notebooks. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right. So let's start talking through some of the essentials. I will copy this link and put it in the chat. If you haven't been to observablehq.com, we're suggesting that you sign up for a free account. You can actually go to any observable notebook and start editing it. But if you want to save those edits, you're going to need to have a free account. And like other code editing and sharing tools, the public work that you create on Observable is free. So as you want to continue using that work, you're not going to have to pay to create dozens or hundreds of notebooks that folks can see. So at Observable, there should be a link to sign up. And then to add once we have key notebook. I guess we should put that link in here now.
Let's add it.
Let's add it. I should have this open. Let me see if I can add that now. What I can do is grab this link. And I very sillily can't, I don't think I can edit this over here, but I can edit it and add other screens going on over here. Sign up for your free account. And then here comes the link to this notebook. Okay, which I'll also put here. All right, so there's a link, and you can either click these three dots, or you can actually just click this, this fork button. The idea is that you want to make your own copy of this notebook. So notebook is something that lives on the web that is a series of pieces of code and output. And you write that code to generate that output like other notebook environments that you might be familiar with. So these are basically a set of instructions that we're going to work through together, some different activities. I think, Allison, if you get out of this cell, then we can collapse this, make it just a little bit more concise. Oop, oop. There we go. Sort of some just nicely formatted markdown there. To answer Juan's question, this very recently changed, so I hope I'm not misspeaking, but for free accounts, notebooks are public, and for pro accounts, you can have private notebooks. And it looks like Benjamin has put in a link here. Yeah, so this was a recent change that that paid notebooks or pro accounts have private notebooks. A lot of different language of private and public. And
Yep.
And Eric, we will talk about embedding near the end, but you can export your visualizations you create and embed them in things like React apps, and we'll talk about how to do that. Setting to put the output below the code chunk. There's not, unfortunately, a setting for that. Observable, for better or for worse, is fairly opinionated in a lot of some of its style and structure, some of which you can adjust, and other pieces you can't. All right, so if we want to start working on this in the same way that you would, we're going to demonstrate what that forking would look like, which means that this notebook we're going to leave as is. So for a starter, other people can come here and fork it as well. But we are going to fork this. You probably just have a personal observable account, but here Allison and I are in the same observable team. A team is a place where you and other people can work collaboratively. I think you can also create free teams now that free tier accounts can create teams. Allison, let me know if I'm stumbling over some of that description.
No, I think that's right. Yep.
And when you and others are on a team, it just means that you can live edit notebooks together and share those. So I'm going to create a fork of this, and I'm going to do it in my team and click this fork button. And again, suggesting that you start at the same notebook and follow that same process. You'll notice that the content looks exactly the same. It's a copy of the notebook, but this URL has changed. I'm going to go ahead and share this so you all in the workshop can follow along here as well. So I'm going to say like R Pharma complete. This is what Allison and I are going to be typing into during this workshop. And we're going to make it so folks can view this as well. You can see that anyone on our team can view or edit it. And I am, this account, am I a person? I thought that was kind of funny, right? Am I a person? No, I'm sorry. All right. So now the URL should be updated. And I'll put this in the chat. So here is where Allison and I are working. And I'll even put a link to this back in the R Pharma workshop slides. I'll just put another link here that says complete version done during workshop. Definitely want some line breaks in there though. Okay. So I can actually see up here that there are 11 forks, so multiple people have done that as well, which is great. Again, we're not going to be editing this R Pharma workshop. We're going to leave this as is so that people can fork it. And we are going to be over in our fork that we just created, which is this R Pharma complete. Like sort of keeping an eye up here on the URL. I'll even come up here and say, that said starter notebook, this is the completed version. All right.
Cool.
Before we get into those essentials, any questions in the chat or any trouble getting set up, getting your notebook forked?
So question here, Mike.
Yeah.
Not seeing the file attachments.
Ooh. That is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you fork a notebook, it doesn't fork over unused file attachments, which is really a shame. So if you see up here in the top right, there's this little paperclip icon. That means that there were 2 files that we had uploaded here. We hadn't done anything with them yet. They weren't anywhere in the notebook. We were going to do that together. Now you all have made some copies of that notebook, and you unfortunately don't have those files attached. So that's okay. We can walk through quickly how we can do that. There are version control pieces that you can do with observable notebooks. Like you can suggest, you can merge across notebooks. but I don't think that that's going to be a fun way to start this workshop. What I'm going to suggest is what you can do is you can just download these files onto your computer. So you click on the paperclip icon and then the three dots next to the name of the file that we're going to use, and click download, and that should appear like any other download. Mine, apparently, I have that same named file, so I have a little one after it. I'm going to do the same thing here, and I'm going to click download, and it should similarly appear down here in my downloads area, and it should be, on my file system. What I'm then going to do, move this Zoom toolbar out of the way, is I'll go to my fork, our Pharma Complete, and I'll click on that same paperclip icon, and I think I can just drag and drop these files right into that area. Mine kind of annoyingly has that one at the end of it. We're just going to live with that because those are the file names on my computer. And now I've uploaded those to this notebook. They're not used yet, and it sort of clearly gives us that information that they're unused. But we now are going to be able to use those files. So yeah, sorry for that. We learned more about these sort of the decisions about how the product works as we move through it, right?
Yep. Maybe we'll give everybody another minute or two.
Yeah.
And
then
then
we're going to use that data.
Yeah, so these are the two files that we're going to be using just while folks are getting set up. And this is data from the World Bank, which contains time series data across the globe for countries based on many different indicators, environmental, demographic, financial. And so we've pulled from the World Bank, and we'll take a look at this in a second, but we've pulled just a few of the variables. Carbon dioxide emissions in kilotons, so that's annually for each country. Life expectancy, that's across the board for each country, the mean life expectancy in years. Population for each country in each year, and GDP, gross domestic product, and that's in current US dollars. There also, we'll see in this data set, are the country names, a country code, income category that's already been specified within the data, and a region like North America. So those are the variables that we're going to be playing with in these data sets to make some interactive visualizations.
Yeah, thanks for that overview. What I have done is, from this paperclip icon, I clicked, there was a little arrow to insert these files into this notebook. So if you fork it from this moment forwards, you'll have it with those files attached. Otherwise, again, the three dots to download it, and then in your notebook where you're doing your work, you just want to pop open that pane by clicking on it and drag and drop those files into the file attachment area. You think we're good to talk about these essentials?
I think so. If they drag and drop, is it typed? Is it automatically use typed true?
So that occurs when you click on this button to insert it into the file or into the notebook, at which point you do have to say that you want to type it, which we'll do.
Got it. Not there yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Why don't you,
Cool.
because folks can see, I'm obviously the one sharing my screen. So why don't you sort of talk us through some of these, and I'll try and follow along with any code steps.
All right. So first things first, if you've been working in R Markdown or Jupyter Notebooks or Quarto, you already have a lot of transferable knowledge. Here, thanks for the clarification earlier. In R Markdown, we often talk about chunks. Here, we're going to talk about cells. But essentially, this notebook is a place where you can combine text and code and outputs all in one place. Where you see these grayed out areas, that's where we're going to have the place we're actually working. Like some of you already noticed in observable notebooks, the output shows up above the code that you're writing or the markdown that you're writing. So those are the basic cell types that we're going to be working with. you'll see that if you look on the left margin, just to the left of the text, you'll see these plus symbols between some of those existing cells. And those plus symbols, those are where you can add new cells. And you can see that when you click on that plus button, the top three, those are the cell types that you can choose from. But then below that, we'll see throughout this workshop, there's a whole bunch of other options that are going to make it really quick for you to get existing code that you can then reuse. So that's how we could add a new code chunk. So here's Mike writing some HTML. You can also write GitHub flavored Markdown like you would in Quarto or R Markdown outside of a code chunk. So you have these options for where things exist. You can run what's in a cell different ways. You'll see in a cell, there's in the top right, that little play button. So you can run any cell by clicking that, or you can use the shortcut, which is Shift Return or Shift Enter. And so that'll also run anything that's in there. For our folks, we're really used to data frames, right? In Observable, we're going to be working mostly with arrays of objects. So you can see that we've created here in this first code chunk where Mike and I both are, you can see that we've created a little array here that has two objects in it about our dogs, of course, where we have these little key value pairs. So we have a name, key, and then Ada and Teddy. The age, their ages are 2 and 6, and then their weights 64 and 50. And when you run that, you can see that we've created an array where if you click on that arrow next to the array in the output where it says array 2, then that'll actually show you what's in there. So you can view this, but just heads up, this might feel a little bit unfamiliar for folks who are working in a data frame, but we'll see that like functionally how you work with those when you create plots feels very, very similar to working with data frames in ggplot2. Okay, so we have this array, and the first thing that we are going to do, and I'll check the chat to see if we, thanks, this is important chat business. Thank you. Oh, Sarah, good, Mila, I love it. Excellent. So Mike's adding some more objects.
And I'm going to interrupt briefly and say there are so many keyboard shortcuts that I won't try and name them all. But if you start typing into this help panel over here, you can see, for example, if I want to copy, you can copy cells, you can copy a line up or down. So I was just doing, I don't even know which symbol that is, and shift and down to copy a line down. Just like any other, thank you. Just like any other text editor, there's all sorts of keyboard shortcuts that are really helpful to start, accelerating your work here.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. All right, so Mike's expanded this array. If you have added your own pet or someone else's pet that you love, great. So we have this array, and you'll also see that Mike has added another cell, a JavaScript cell below that, where he's added this inputs.table. And cool. And you can see first like that like immediate reactivity, right? Which is really cool. Like as soon as Mike changes something in this, like if I change this to Teddy Dog, as soon as I run this, then that's instantly changed anywhere else that this shows up in the notebook. So I don't have to separately run cells. I don't render the entire document. It's immediately rerun throughout the entire notebook. So we have this nice inputs.table that gives us this nice view of our data set. But what we want to jump into right away is why you're all here, which is making a visualization. I think that the really cool thing about Plot is like how quickly you can go from data to insights. And it makes it really easy to get started, even if you've never written JavaScript before, or if you've never worked in Observable before. So what we're going to be using is we're going to be using a lot of the existing code snippets. So down here under this first activity, the activities are in yellow. I'm going to do one thing before that we'll do together. which is I'm going to insert a cell. So I've pressed this plus button, and then I'm going to start typing, and this will automatically help sort. So I'm going to start typing bar, which is the type of chart that I want to create. And you can see in the drop-down menu that there's a number of different bar types. We're going to choose that first one. And what pops up is this skeleton where it already has existing data built in that exists already. So if I run this, then you can see that this has this placeholder chart there. That means that what we need to do is just update what currently exists for data and for the variables that we want to plot so that they appear in this chart. There was a question on the chat, so let's check that. Oh, cool. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to go for it?
Inputs are a really fun way that you can quickly create visual elements, but those visual elements can sometimes be tied to an underlying value. This is sort of a simple example of an input where we just want to see the output. We'll get into this more later, but because someone brought it up, you could, for example, create a radio button, which is one of the observable inputs. Below we had inputs.table. This is inputs.radio. And this is, some selection. You can actually tab through these options. You want A or B or whatever these are. Select one, value A. What's cool about this is it creates your visual element, right? Your radio buttons, whatever it is, but then selection holds that value. So if you want to use an input to control a chart or control a table or an analysis or whatever it is, you can use this this view of operation. We can even do it here and say view of selected dogs is that, and then selected dogs. If we click on only particular rows of the table, only those will be selected. And yeah, you could think of inputs as like a package, and table is one of its functions.
Yeah, cool. Great question.
So sorry to interrupt. You were halfway through getting into the chart.
That's great. Interrupt anytime. All right, so we had used one of the existing snippets that comes along with some of this pre-existing data, this alphabet data, which just contains frequencies of letters, letter usage in the English alphabet. But what we want to do is actually make a plot that has a bar plot of our amazing dogs, right? So we're going to update these things. So what do you see here? First, let's try to align some of this with some ggplot stuff in case folks are familiar. This plot.plot, this is initializing a plot. This is like saying ggplot. Then we have this marks. So marks you can think of as geoms in ggplot. This is basically going to dictate what elements are going to show up in your plot panel. Like plot dot will make a scatter plot. That would be like geom point. Plot bar y, which is what we're using here, that's going to make a vertical bar plot. So these are analogous to geoms. And then we have within this plot bar y, that's the mark we're going to be creating. This first argument is the data. So we'll go ahead and change that to dogs. And then we'll change the X and Y to what we want these to be. So on the X axis, I'm going to have name. On the Y axis, I'm going to have age.
Oops, sorry.
And then you can see age, thanks. And then you can see that we have this sorted bar chart. So some of the things that might be like, whoa, this is a lot. A couple of things when I first started using plot, there are the braces and brackets. There are a couple more, so just be aware of that. And also be aware that just like minor translation things. So for example, stroke, you would use stroke instead of color to change the outline of a mark, for example. But what we have created is we have created a just an example side-by-side comparison that I'll add in the chat that's not comprehensive, but we hope will help folks to see similarities in major elements between plot and ggplot. So this is interactive and highlightable. And if you hover over any piece in this table, then it'll show you on the left column, like, what is this thing actually doing? In the center column, this is what you would write in ggplot2. And in the right column, here's the analogous thing in Observable Plot, which hopefully helps folks transfer your existing knowledge from ggplot into what this would look like in Plot.
I think this is such a fun teaching tool. Thank you so much for making this, Allison. Like, this is exactly what I want for doing this translation.
It was really fun to make, and shout out, Mike already mentioned Phil. This was such a cool thing. I was like, I want to make a thing that looks like this, and I put it in the Observable chat, and Phil, like 15 minutes later, was like, made it. I think other folks who work in Observable have that experience with Phil too.
Oh, you know, we got to add a search, like at the top, so you can search for a purpose, like search for X, search for Y, and then it'll just like highlight that one.
Great idea. Okay. Yep. I'm going to do that right after this ends. Cool. Okay. So takeaway from this example is that these snippets give you a quick skeleton from which you can then build and customize a plot in Plot. And that the structure is also based on the grammar of graphics. So the design thinking feels very similar to the way that you might have been building graphs in ggplot2 already. Anything else you want to add here, Mike, before we ask him to do an activity?
I know that I'm getting a little ahead, but I can't help but connect these two concepts.
Do it.
And I'm going to do one other thing. One, you can drag these cells around to reorder your content, which is nice. Over here, we have what is called the mini map that helps you show the connection between cells, right? So dogs goes into plot.plot, right? And it doesn't look like it is. We click on dogs, we see all the places that it goes. We click on plot.plot, we see on all the things that it depends on. And this brand new feature, as of like yesterday, you can now drag and drop in the mini map.
It's so nice.
So that you can reorder your content as you're looking at it over here.
Yeah, that is such a nice new feature.
Yeah.
It's a great way to move things around.
But we have two pieces of information about dogs, age and weight. So I just want to put those in this selection here, right? Age and weight. And the value selected can be age, right? So this is just going to be a string under this. But we could use that, we call this selection, to power our chart. And instead of showing age, we can just show selection. So now let's make these next to each other. You can even unpin this if we want to hide the code. We can choose what we're showing. So if we sort it by age, oh, Teddy dog's oldest, and little Ada beta.
These are all young dogs.
Yeah. But by weight, Ada, in fact, jumps to the top. Though we, of course, have a lingering question about data quality and units. I wonder if some of these perhaps are in kilograms and other are in pounds.
Great question.
Or like I saw that like Sierra seems like a very small dog. I hope that she's okay. Or I hope that she is in kilograms.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Okay. So it's been 50 minutes. This is perfect. Why don't we take about 10 minutes and do this activity, creating a scatter plot of dog age versus dog weight. Encourage folks to use the plus icon, but this is also a nice chance. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat or raise your hand, or if you want to take a couple minutes break, maybe we'll start a few minutes after the hour. Feel free to, stretch your legs, get a coffee, get a water, whatever. Yeah. And I see questions coming in already. You're right. View of is custom observable syntax. That's a good observation. Is any of the music in the background getting picked up on my mic?
No, not at all.
Okay, good. I just
But I hope it's good music.
it's the Encanto soundtrack. I've heard it about 10 million times, which
wow.
it's great. But there's sometimes a limit to a great thing. Not observable notebooks. There's no limit to how many great observable notebooks you could have. All right, Allison, we got a question from Anthony in the chat.
Great question. So there is a function that's built in that allows you to and I'll find it, that allows you to pass data frame from R or Python to an OJS code chunk. So yeah, I think let me find the documents for it and then I'll post it in the chat. So you can use OJS _define, and that makes a data frame available then to use in an OJS cell. So let me post this in the chat. And this is something that I've only started using. So if other folks in the call have used this more than I do, then yeah, please chime in. But you can pass things between the different chunk types in Quarto, which is really cool. And I'll put the closer link. Sorry, I sent the home one.
Maybe
thanks, Mike.
All right.
So that one that I just sent is specifically where it says how to use OJS define. Yeah, sure thing.
Ooh, can you duplicate cells? And can you have the selection on top of the bar chart and on top of the scatter plot? Great questions. And yes, you can. So if you click over here on the question mark and search for duplicate cells, we've got Option Shift up and Option Shift down. Oh, that just did a little, maybe it's Command Shift up and Command Shift down. It seemed to me that holding Command Option Shift down did it. And just Option Shift. I'm actually going to just take a quick screenshot of that and make sure that that is correct later. One of the great things about continuous development, continually improving. So we've got that exact same cell. Great to have that for a place to start. I'll just unpin this, and Allison, if you want to pop out of that cell so I can collapse it.
Yep.
That's one thing, is you can't collapse a cell where somebody is, because you want to see that they're there. And you should see that these two cells are both connected to the selection. And we should see that reflected in the mini map as well, that this selection is powering both of those plots. So regardless of the type of plot that is, it's going to be tied back to that selection.
So Mike, and correct me, Juan, if I'm misrepresenting this. One question I have is, if you have let's say you have graphs that aren't immediately next to each other and you want the same slider above both of them, right? So it's immediately visible. You know what I mean? Then
like you want a copy of that.
Yeah, but it has to have a different name, I think, right? You can't have the same name.
There's a way.
Cool.
And I don't remember it offhand. I'm searching for it over here. Let me see if I can surface it sort of quickly. Here is a notebook on synchronized inputs. Let's see if this does what we're looking for. So here we have a slider. We can see its value, and then it looks like there are these two buttons that when you click on each one, this is a very condensed arrow function, a little function where you can set the value to something. So if you wanted like the same slider twice, basically, as is the case here, I think you can say inputs.bind inputs.range to view of X. So it's a bit dense, but here on the inside, we have a range slider that gets created, and we want to bind that using inputs.bind to the view of X. So those should be mirrored. Oh, and it's cool. You can bind to different types, right? Like here is a numeric input, input type equals range or type equals number. Those are also both bound to the input above.
Okay.
So that's one way you could do, you know,
Cool.
if you have a really long notebook, you could use that inputs.bind.
Gotcha. Oh, Mike, I think this question is for you. How simple is it to show data on hover?
Not as simple as it should be. That's how simple it is. This is definitely somewhere where we're still actively working. Because this is JavaScript, you can do any customizations you want. But that's a bit open-ended. We'll look at a function that I had written to add tooltips to your plot in what I think is a pretty concise syntax, but it isn't available quite out of the box.
Yeah, and crosstalk is really cool for our users.
Ooh, I've never crosstalked.
It's nice. Yeah, it's a way that you can have like a single widget control multiple outputs, table or figure. Yeah, that are connected.
Yeah, so it looks like bind is one way to do that, but we can, yeah, like you can see that these are referencing both of these things. And we can even we can write a short markdown sentence here, like below we are comparing the dogses.
Yeah, that's right.
Selection. And this is just what's called a template literal. It's a way to take a JavaScript variable and kind of jam it inside of your markdown so that when we change this, it will also change here. And we can decorate that with a little bit more markdown. And this is really nice in the same way that in our markdown, you can have variables in your text, whatever is changing either in your notebook or in your data, you can have that in the, in the narrative that you're creating in the notebook.
Yeah, that would be the equivalent in R in markdown, having your two backticks in the R and then whatever objects you wanted to call.
What do you say? I think it's been about 10 minutes. Maybe we can just do this activity quickly.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Do you want to narrate as I use this menu here?
Sure. So for this activity, Mike is going to check out all the different options, probably by starting to type in there for a scatter plot, maybe. We can see a scatter plot shows up, which will bring up a nice skeleton. And you can see again that this follows the initiate plot. And the mark is going to be a plot dot, which then the first argument is going to be our data, which is dogs. And then we can add our X and Y variable names, which are our keys. So think we have weight. Yep. And if you did this in reverse, that's fine. So now we can see the weight versus age of all of our dogs. And you can add different aesthetic mappings right within those two brackets where age and weight are added to. So if you look at those side-by-side co-highlighting, you might have seen that you can change the fill color. So you can base that on a constant, like fill is set to red, or, oh yeah, or you can make it based on, so there it's based on a constant. Here it's based on a variable. So you can see that this feels similar to mapping either a constant or a variable onto an aesthetic fill here. One difference is that instead of size for points, you have this R, so a radius measure. Okay, so this one, okay, so this one I'll give a shot at. So Mike has just written out some code that's probably like, what have you done?
Don't do that. Yeah.
No? Okay.
No, you can talk through it. I'm just saying this
Okay,
isn't,
yeah, don't do that. But what has Mike just done? A couple things here that are going to look unfamiliar. First, you see that little arrow that Mike has created. That's what's called an arrow function operator. That's essentially a really concise way of writing a function in JavaScript. So instead of here writing function of d brackets return d dot name, which would get all of the name values back from our array, you can just use this form d arrow d dot name. That's going to do the same thing. So there's this concise function that's pulling and then returning the name values from our dogs array. This other thing that might look strange, actually, this is a great teaching JavaScript example, Mike.
I'm really putting it to the test. Yeah.
These three equals. So in R, when we ask the question, does this match? We use the double equals sign. In JavaScript, there's two options. There's the loose equality operator, and that checks for if the value, but not necessarily the class, is the same. So if you do string to double equal sign value to, the answer is true. The strict equality operator is a little bit more strict. That means that the class also has to match. So here, both the value and the class have to match Ada. The last thing here that's happening is what's called the ternary operator. So this is a concise way in JavaScript of writing an if-else statement. So here, this asks the question, there's this condition, does the name value match Ada? And then there's a question mark that asks, is that true? If yes, then R should be 100. If no, then R should be 1, which is why for Ada's point here, we see this gigantic point. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, it's
practice.
There's lots to criticize about any programming language, and they all have their quirks, but when you can leverage them, it's really powerful. I also just want to something else we haven't done is just add another mark. Like, what if we want these, but what if we want some text, like which dogs are these? And we can just say that the text should be the name. Oh no.
Just a comma, I think, was the issue.
All right, and obviously we don't want those directly over there. I think we can nudge it over with a little dx. Oh, you know what? I think we can do text anchor start. So it'll start at the beginning of the word, and then just nudge it over, 5 pixels.
Oh, that's cool. There they are.
And you can see the things that we want to keep in configuring, like, oh no, Teddy's getting cut off. We can't have that. Padding right, 100 pixels. I'm always mixing up margin and padding. I don't think it's
padding,
margin.
me too.
Padding right, what if we make it 200 pixels? No. I don't think that that's right. Oh, how about that? Margin right. That'll do it for us. Don't need that much, maybe 50, not quite enough, 60. Also, here's like, I often do this in chart design. This is like a little bit over the top, but it's like, oh, what about margin right? Right? We don't actually know how much we want it to be. Well, we can just put that down there. and slide it around, be like, oh, what do I want my chart to look like? Like, not that, not that, like that looks good. Okay, 57, rather than like write the code, unwrite the
That's
code, write the
cool.
code, unwrite the code. You also might have noticed that I snuck this in, that JavaScript is really smart sometimes, and that it tries to do object destructuring. So we didn't say what margin right was. It just knows that margin right is a variable, but that's also the name of a key that we want in here. So it's like breaking it out. This is the same as just saying margin right is margin right.
That's cool.
So yeah, some little syntactical tricks that can be fun to use.
Yeah, really nice.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Let's get into some real data. I mean, I know Mike could work with dogs data.
I mean, it's real. It's real.
It is real. It is real. Yeah, you're right. Let's work with slightly more involved data to explore some patterns. All right. So hopefully folks were able to attach those two files, this code, country codes, and the World Bank data. And if you haven't already, then you're going to want to also insert those to make them available for use in your notebook. And one way that you can do that is by clicking on the little notebook with an arrow, that blue icon that Mike's on, and that will automatically add a cell for you, a JavaScript cell with the file attachment function that you would need to then make that file available. We're going to add one more thing to this, which is because for untyped file types like a CSV, it's not going to be kind of automatically parsed. So when you add right within that .csv, that typed true option, then it's going to make guesses about column types, similar to how read CSV would work. So this is going to ensure that our values that are values are numeric, and then we have some strings in there too. All right, so you can do that. That's the main one we're going to be using for now. Let's check the chat. Are there ways to create libraries or packages for observable plot similar to ggplot? Cool, thanks, Mike. Yeah, do you want to chat about that?
Yeah, we'll look at this later on, but
Okay.
anything that you create in one notebook, you can import into another notebook, whether that's a function or a data cell. And you can even import that, say, a chart with your existing data without having to explicitly parameterize a function. Like, you can just sort of use the data in your current notebook to overwrite the data in the chart that it's being pulled in from. You can, of course, write these as functions, then use them however you like, but we'll look at some examples there.
I thought that was one of the coolest differences, was like how easy it was to grab stuff from other notebooks and reuse. Yeah.
And Svetlana, I see your question. I don't have an exact answer, but I know that our pro and our enterprise customers have worked with different levels of sensitive data in different countries and contexts, and we have multiple people on our team that help ensure that your privacy is up to date in the necessary ways. So I actually will intentionally not talk about clinical data, pharmaceutical data, because I don't want to give anyone incorrect information about the security. I think that when you upload a file attachment, that file lives in on an Amazon Web Services bucket that isn't hosted by Observable, like it isn't on servers. I guess we do rent those servers, but they're not ours. We don't look at those files, and I think that we have different pieces in place to ensure that regulations are met, but we also do have people that use different workarounds who have incredibly sensitive data that like our customer success teams would be able to walk you through what those different workarounds look like.
Cool, thanks, Mike. Yeah, good question. All right, so we have this file attached now, which means it's available for us to use. let's go ahead and just take a look at it in like table format. It's always a good idea. So you can just, click on and expand that array, but this is kind of a clunky way to take a look at and explore your data. So instead, we're going to use this inputs table function, just right on the name that we gave that data, and you can see that this brings up a nice selectable table. So you can see these are some of the variables that we had talked about: country code, year, CO2 emissions, GDP, life expectancy, population, and then a couple of other categorical variables that we could factor things by or facet things by. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do one more thing in JavaScript. We are going to add a new code cell where we make a subset just for 2019. I think we can call this, data 2019. And we're going to use a function. It's array.filter. So if you give it your array name .filter, then you're going to give it an arrow function. It doesn't have to be an arrow function. We'll use an arrow function that specifies our condition for filtering. So we're going to say that the row must be equal to 2019. So you can see here, Mike just showed before we were using D as this sort of like name for the argument, but it could be anything. You'll oftentimes see D, but as long as you're consistent, it could be whatever you want. And that's just accessing the year values. So this has created a new subset of the data. You can see that it only has 217 objects in it. So it's been limited from the original data set. Now let's go ahead. So we have that subset, and now we're going to get into some more plots using this data.
All right. We had some slides. I think the only thing that our slides encouraged us to do was to show some inspiring examples. I do see a comment in the chat about where to get more documentation. I think the best place to go is to start in this notebook. And within it, you'll have references to GitHub. Plot is an open source project. You can contribute to Plot. You can read all the source code of Plot. You can use Plot in any JavaScript project. It doesn't have to be on Observable, though we are the primary contributors. So that is some documentation. I worked on these Plot cheat sheets, as long as we're talking about Plot. Which you can download as a PDF, as a sort of a handy reference. I know people love the R cheat sheets. These were inspired by those in various ways. And there are also, so we can take a look at these, this sort of walks through what we've already talked about in terms of the different marks that are available in Plot, and then walks through how to customize these different options, right? All these different ways of customizing your scale and all of these different ways of formatting your ticks, like the really granular control that you're used to in ggplot is also supported here in Plot. And what I like is if, let's say, you want to look more in depth at scales, this gives you some interactive ways to explore what these do, sort of built using observable inputs. So you can say like, oh, like what exactly does it mean to have padding increased in a point scale, or what's the difference between time and UTC? So yeah, this will, you can rotate your ticks and change their size, like all these. If like you really want that line to be longer, you can do it. So beautiful cheat sheets. Is there an in-browser observable notebook? Yes. Okay, fine. I'll talk about data wrangling. Allison, can you just grab the notebook link? It's like you know what I'm talking about. Read
the one that you created for this data?
Yeah. Caro. I think that the leading way to do data wrangling in Observable is with this library called Arcaro. So here is documentation about how to use this. It should look really similar to dplyr. And just for some reference, when I originally downloaded the World Bank data from that World Bank interface, this is the format that it came in, where each year was a column with the number followed by a bracket with year number in it. Like I imagine for as R users, this is similarly a nightmare of like, what is R going to even call these columns? And you want to drop certain observations and you don't care about this column. So that was a mess. And here is the Arcaro code for doing that transformation. So we're not going to go through this. Like this isn't like the argument of this workshop isn't to start doing all of your data transformation code in using Arcaro. But I think it should look really similar, right? You're selecting columns. You can do complex reshaping like folding, which would be pivot longer, or pivoting, which would be pivot wider. You can do joins on the metadata, derive new columns, select things, rename them. And that is all of the code necessary for going from this mess up here to this tidy data down here that we're using.
It's really nice. I was surprised. Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Yeah.
I want to get back into writing code soon, but just one inspiring example. This is something I worked on with two of our coworkers, Zan and Ian, who've both done a lot in the D3 community. It was a really fun project. We were just looking at if all you have is a timestamp and a number, like what are all the things that you can do with that? It's like, okay, you can have a timeline, or you could, do a rolling average over some period of time. But you can also create meaningful features of your data. Like, was it a weekend? What was the day of the week? What was the month of the year? Zan has given some amazing talks on seasonality and how things are recurring. And we devised this layout where every one of these timestamps, we just wanted to draw a tick. And then we wanted to group it by X and Y in different ways. Here we're looking at, hour of the day and then quarter of the year. This was electricity demand. And then we wanted the backgrounds of those to show the average, the median of that. I think it's the median of that electricity usage. And what's awesome about Plot and working with Plot and Observable is you can customize what you want to go in your rows and columns. So like if you wanted to see every day of the year, if you look like by day and week, you're going to see the whole year. Or if you're really curious about hourly patterns throughout the week, you can do, or throughout the weeks of the year, you can do that here. We can obviously like flip these and look at hour of the day and weekend. And like, it's awesome. And like, I don't want to say it wasn't hard, but aside from like some of the faceting that we tried to make more condensed, like what we're really doing is like plot.tick of your data where X is the value. And we're, here's our color scheme. Here's our X label. We wanted to facet the data according to, well, these two different inputs, X facet and Y facet. We had to do some like different calculations about the margin using these ternary operators. If it's week or hour, we wanted to change the margin left. But it really wasn't, once we started thinking in the grammar of graphics, we were able to extract the different options into drop-down menus. And then we just were transforming these super quickly.
So cool.
It's really fun.
It's really fun.
That's why me, Allison and I both are enjoying, working on this software. Is like, it really amplifies the speed with which you can do this exploration.
Yeah, how quickly and painlessly you can make a widget and then connect it to a visualization and immediately start playing is pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's make sure everybody learns how to do this. Where were we? Okay. Do you want to talk us through doing a histogram?
Yeah, sure. All right, so now we're going to make a histogram with the fill color dependent on region. So again, we're going to start from snippets. So if you click on that plus, you'll see the start typing histogram that comes up, automatically populates with a skeleton. We'll replace that Olympians data with our 2019 data, which is the 20 data _ 2019. That Y count, that's doing an aggregation for us. There are different aggregations that you can do. This is, since it's a histogram, just counting the observations. And then along the x-axis, we're going to have life, which is our variable name for life expectancy. So running that again by pressing that arrow or with shift return above that cell, you'll see that histogram show up. And then we can, within where we're specifying these channels, these mappings, then we can say what the fill color is, and we're going to base that on the region. And we'll see this now is a histogram where we can see by region the different counts of life expectancies. So these would each represent a different country as life expectancy. So we made this histogram. We're going to see later on how we can add tooltips to this so that you could hover over it and see what region you're actually talking about. Maybe, Mike, did you want to add anything else here, or should we hop into just one more example and then start adding some inputs?
The only other thing I would think about doing is looking at this, just faceting it, which we can do now, or we could save till later.
Let's do it. Let's go ahead and add a facet. Yeah.
And I actually I think that there's some pretty powerful trends in the histogram, but we can talk about visual perception a separate time, but we're just oh, it goes up and then down, and we're sort of missing the stories in the middle. Mm-hmm. So I almost just want to break this out into different small multiples by region.
And we'll add legends too.
I'll just do it right now.
Yeah.
Color, legend, true. Whew.
Whew. What I do think is kind of cool is since it starts with kind of minimal assumptions about what you want, requires you to be really deliberate about what gets added, which I think leads to more sometimes easier to be more thoughtful about what ends up in the plot. It doesn't come with the grid lines, but we could add those if we wanted to. So it starts with a pretty blank slate graph type.
All right, so if we wanted to facet this, just to break it out, we just need to give it two pieces of information. What data is going to give you the data to break it up by, which in, I want to say every case for me is the data that I'm using. Mm-hmm. And then the direction that we want to do the facet, right? So in this case, we could do Y is region. And now we can see, for example, let's add some margin right. I don't know, 100. Oh, this is maybe we want the margin right in the facet. This is one of these things that I haven't totally mastered. Yeah, so margin rate 150 in the facet so that those facet labels don't get cut off.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that one.
And I think we can even say in here label null to get rid of that it says region. If you're familiar with this data set, you probably know that these are regions.
Nice.
You'll notice that the order of these options doesn't particularly matter. It's just one object specifying this. Oh no, but you can't have an error. That matters. So we can make it be full width just by saying width, because width is a JavaScript variable just by default in your notebooks. That makes your charts responsive really nicely.
So cool.
And we can also set a height, right? This is kind of extreme for getting some quick patterns. Maybe we just want it to be 500 pixels. And then we can see some of these differences.
Cool.
And Svetlana asked about getting these out. We'll talk about embedding this in a different website or a React application later, but you can just go to download this either in SVG or PNG format.
Cool.
Oh, it just makes exploration so I just want to do more, right? I just want to add income group as another facet. So now we're looking at these broken out by region vertically and income group vertically in columns and then region in rows. And you can even see that like there are some regions that don't have any countries in a particular income group, or you can see like across income group, like is the trend, is the distribution similar across regions? Like this is interesting.
Yeah. Oh, so this is a good question in the chat, Mike, is I know for there maybe coming down the line is going to be a hovering helper where when you start writing pieces of plot, the arguments will show up. But there's a question about where can you see the different arguments for functions in JavaScript if you're working in Observable?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that as you start typing it, this is also very new. It's not on hover. There's some amount of autocomplete here. Yeah, so it will give you some suggestions, but it looks like it isn't giving you all of those options as I might have expected. Area Y. I thought that this might have given you some better hints as to what to put in there. But you might have to, sort of look that up separately. And yes, in ordering the facets, we owe it to you to put these income categories in order. I think that we faceted that in the Y direction. So I think we can say FY, the facet in the Y direction. And I think we can give it a data domain and just put these in order. So high income, upper middle income, lower middle income, low income. I think that will work. Definitely not. The facet Y.
Should it be facet X?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. There you go. Did we do that right? We did do that right.
Cool.
And we can add some grid lines if people like those. We can also add frames around these just as a mark. That's like a little bit extreme stroke. This is just some I like this gray color, but it feels like I'm just repping D3 really hard.
That's it. That makes it easy to remember.
Yeah.
It's a nice gray.
D3, D3, D3. I think we can also, in the facet, I think we can say padding null if we want these to be really close. That's not quite right. But if we went back to the plot cheat sheets, which I can't access because of Zoom, Zoom, get out of the way. There is a whole cheat sheet on layouts. And if we look at this, I think there's one with a facet in it that gives us all of these options. So here we have like a 2-directional facet, and the facets have, you have to do it inside f of x. A lot of the reason that I wanted to do this was because I couldn't remember like inset right or inset left. It's like, that's the space between the chart and the something else. So yeah, we can say like fx padding 0 if we really want this grid to be kind of tight.
So nice.
Where were we? Fx padding 0. And looks like maybe that's the same for fy. That's like, I'm okay with that small amount of space. Okay. Sorry, I was like, just let me do one little quick thing.
This is great. I learned a lot.
Okay.
Cool.
Should we then do this code I feel like we've been like 30 minutes in. Maybe we'll do 1 or 2 of these code togethers, and then it'll be a nice time to take maybe 10-15 minutes to do these activities.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you want me to do this one? Do you want to show the menus and stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start it out, but then I want you to take over.
All right.
Typing too much. All I know is that we want to scatter plot. So I'll leave it there. And
Okay.
we'll switch roles. So I'll sort of narrate and Allison will go in.
Okay.
So we want a scatter plot, but we don't want it of the cars data set. So Allison's going to switch that up to data 2019. And along the X, put GDP. You can actually tab. Oh, I created this, so you can't tab through them. That's one of the nice things when you do this snippet is that you can tab through them. It's also like the collaborative editing is really nice. Like I didn't think I would use this so much as I do, but when like Allison and I were making these notebooks together, it's like, oh, as soon as we do this, like I grabbed X and she grabbed Y.
Yeah, that's cool.
Cool. And what you want to fill by region and set the radius to be the population. Boom.
Cool. You can see it does. This is really nice. Auto formats my code to be pretty for me, which is awesome. And is that in the preferences, Mike? Is that one of the preference settings? So in your observable notebook, if you go all the way up to the top, you'll have some preference settings that you can choose. And one of them that you can select is you can choose to automatically allow Prettier to format your code automatically, which is pretty nice.
Yeah.
So that's why I have this nice vertically arranged data. Okay, so now we've done, okay, so one thing we haven't done is update the scale. So you can see along the x-axis here, GDP has this huge range. We're gonna make this into a log scale. So I'm gonna be updating the x-axis and here. And again, this is, you could look at the cheat sheets. I'm gonna update that to a log scale. And you can see it also does a pretty nice job of updating the formatting so that that scale is looking pretty nice.
Beautiful. Ooh, I actually don't know if this exists yet. Does this exist? It doesn't exist. I know that was something in development.
Okay.
That's okay. We'll settle for a color legend.
Cool.
Color palettes. Allison, you're the artist. Tell us about color palettes.
Oh man. I guess my only advice would be careful and try to be as accessible as possible with color palettes. But there exists within, ggplot, you can change the color schemes. So I forget what this default one is called, but there's like the Tableau color scheme. You can see, yeah, if you update the schemes, or Tableau 10, there are different. Yeah, so I think that's one, but there are a number of different color schemes. There's also like the standards that you see, like blues, purples, blues, greens. If you have a continuous variable here, we're mapping it to a categorical, so that probably doesn't make a lot of sense to try to do that. But the palette names that you're used to, set 1, set 2, pastel 1, pastel 2, a lot of those also exist here. And you change those within scheme.
And you can also set a custom color range. So if you really wanted them to be like yellow and blue, in this case, we haven't provided quite enough colors. It's just going back and forth between them. But that would be how you would do a custom range.
Cool.
And I think there is a viridis, built in.
All right, should we do the next one together?
Yeah, this was your I came back from lunch and this was in the notebook. I loved it. So
all right, let's do it.
Let's do it.
So this one, we're gonna we're gonna have a scatter plot of GDP versus life expectancy. And then we are gonna connect it to an input slider where we can change the value of year. And this is gonna allow us to interactively explore patterns in GDP and life expectancy across different countries. Okay, so Mike is going to go ahead and add, so you can see him doing this. He's going to go ahead and add this skeleton for, are we just doing this one here? GDP life. Okay, so we're going to use this same plot. Cool. And you can see that Mike now from the menu, if you search for range, just once you click plus, start typing range, and you'll see the range slider input come up. That's going to bring up this skeleton for this input. So you can see what we're going to do is we're going to change this initial argument. That's an array of values that is the minimum value that you start at for the slider and the maximum that it goes to for the slider. But instead of writing in these absolute values, we actually probably want these to be based on the data. So Mike right now is showing this cool function from D3 extent, which will provide that minimum and maximum of any of your variables for you. So that's what we're going to put in here is that extent. You can also change the label. So maybe this could be a label that says year or something instead. Right now it currently says amount. So you can choose max year, and then you can choose the intervals that it increases by, which we want to be 1. That value that Mike's adding, that's the value that it's going to start at, which we want to be the lowest value instead of starting in the middle. So now we have this input that has a name of max year, but what it hasn't done yet is we haven't connected this to our scatter plot that we've created. And the way that we're going to do this, you can add filter functions directly within plot, but what we're going to do is we're going to create a subset of our data that changes based on our slider value. So calling this filter data, we're going to start with Woolerbake data. We use that filter function. Then we're going to give it an arrow function that just says, hey, filter so that you're only keeping observations where the year value is less than or equal to whatever the value is that's currently selected on that slider. So you'll see as Mike slides that slider that the number of objects in that change. So this is like a cumulative collection of observations up to the year that you've selected from the data set. So those are 2 things that we've done so far, but what we haven't done is we're still in this scatter plot using that static data 2019. So let's replace that with this interactive filtered data. And then what we can see is now that that's using data that's based on that slider value, and since these are automatically connected, then when we slide our slider, then we can see this trend, which looks so cool, towards increasing GDP and life expectancy across the board, which is pretty cool.
Oh, what did you do? You did opacity as year?
I think I might have done an opacity, yeah, too. But yeah, you can change these to whatever you want. One thing that you might notice is that it can get a little bit visually distracting when you have like multiple dimensions changing. So we have the actual like interactive appearing of the data, but maybe we want these scales to be static. So let's go ahead and also update the domain of X and Y to be based on the extent just of GDP, the minimum maximum for GDP and the minimum and maximum for the life expectancy. And that way those are going to stay static while we can see the data, the trends in the data changing.
That is brilliant.
Yep.
Except this is, where did my cursor go? Thank you.
There we go. Yep.
Teamwork.
Cool. So now we have static axes values, but we can see these changes with pretty much every country, which is kind of the trail that you see, most of them following paths up and to the right. So over time, increasing in GDP and life expectancy.
Forgive me. Just
Go for it.
Want to, right? The data is filtered data, and then Y is region. Oh, I want X to be region. That's too tall.
Cool. I'm gonna change your
width.
You could change the the width or the range on the radius too. But yeah.
Yes, please. And now actually, like, what if we fill by country instead?
Yeah. Ooh, let me see.
Let's get rid of that legend. No thanks.
Whole legend.
Yeah, and the question if there's a way to remove the previous points. If we wanted to just show a current year, we could just say, let's only look at this year. So now we can kind of get that, that animation happening. There is also some animation, like some time animation work happening in Plot, but can you facet wrap across rows? Not out of the box. But you can look at like the index of basically like which one it is and do some math about where you want it to go. Let's save that for the end. If we have a little bit of time at the end and ping a question, I'll try and cook that up, but it's like a little bit cumbersome.
Cool. So I think it's a good time for an activity and or break. It's 11:45, so we got another hour and 15 minutes. So we have this next activity. And if you get done with this, go ahead and you can start with a bonus activity. But the one we would love for you to try is this. We created that stacked histogram of life expectancy. And then Mike, did you already connect this to a input?
I don't think so.
Okay,
I
cool.
think that's going to be up to the challenge.
Okay, so go ahead and try. You can create a skeleton for a histogram of life expectancy, and then try to add an input. It's probably going to be a radio button input where based on whether you select life or CO2 or GDP, which one of those shows up in your plot. So give that a shot. Maybe we'll spend, what do you think, Mike, until 12?
Yeah. Let's take a proper, 15 minutes, and we'll be here to answer any questions. Maybe I'll take a crack at that facet grid. In the meantime, I'll just put that at the bottom down here.
Cool.
But yeah, we'll answer any questions in the meantime.
Yeah, Juan, this is I love this comment that like the more seamless that it can be to get something from R into Observable, where you can work with it, the better. So definitely, definitely agree with that. And then get it back into Corto, I think would be really cool to streamline that. So, Amezkita, Robert's question, running the slider makes me think of animations, anything of the sort in OJS. I'm going to ask for clarification on this one. Do you mean, are there options for like a play button that will automate the run through? Or do you mean, can you do this in an OJS chunk in Corto? A play button. So there are, right? I haven't played with them much, but there are ways to automate like a play button that'll run through an entire visualization.
There are, which I don't have a simple example of.
Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, one that we might take a look at is the find this notebook. So this is an admittedly complex notebook to put together. Let me just grab the URL. I'll put it over here. Is this bar chart race, which is a fun one. There's also a really nice explainer that walks through all the code that was involved to put this together. And maybe we'll do this with our data, time pending. But the way that this works is that there's just this replay button that whenever somebody clicks it, it reevaluates this cell, which means it's going to start over at the beginning. So like that part of this isn't particularly complex. And Abhijit has a great point here about the order of cells, is that they're arbitrary. So you can create something lower down in a notebook and reference it above. And that is all handled by what's called the observable runtime, which evaluates all of your code and automatically updates any dependent cells, which means that you can have like an appendix section at the bottom where you do your data wrangling or something like that. And Antoine wanted a re-explanation of this max year. Let me try and break that down. I'm also realizing that I don't know off the top of my head how to do this. All right, so how did this work? Inputs.range, the first thing that we have here, this is an array, which we usually have with square brackets with the min and the max. And that is what gets returned from this D3 extent function. Sometimes it helps to just break it apart. That D3 extent function takes two arguments. One is some data, but if we're getting the maximum of a whole data set, we need to know like how to evaluate each row. And all this is saying is let's go in and grab the year from each one of these, right? If we said D dot population, then we would get the range of population there. And of course, I just want to create some radio buttons to select which one, but let's not go there. Unnecessary. So that gives us that array, 1997, 2021. So that's the same, that's the equivalent of just having that right there. And then the second argument that we put in here is just a configuration of options. So what do we want the label to be? How far do we move in each step that we drag the slider? And then what is the current value? This line of code works very similarly to D3 extent. It gets the minimum of the data. Well, how does it compare each one of the rows of data, or in JavaScript, like each one of the objects in the array of objects? And it will compare them by looking at the year.
So yeah, the adjusting to the nonlinear form, you can define, yeah, that it does take some getting used to. When I was so used to like chronological code and that being a strict requirement. And it's pretty cool to not be beholden to that. You'll see oftentimes in observable notebooks that there's an appendix section where folks include things like file attachments, imports, things that they don't want to be like at the up top visible for other folks to see. So it allows you to have a little bit more organizational control about what you prioritize. But it does take some getting used to. I totally agree.
And if you export the chart, I haven't done this to Corto, but Maya says that you can export from your notebook and load it directly into Corto. And we'll look at exporting and sharing visualizations in this last section of the workshop. One thing that it does is it will intelligently include all of the dependencies that it needs to create that, say, chart or input. Oh, I know what the missing step is. Right now. We have to get the index of the countries. This is why this is tricky. I don't know if this is true. What do we want to say? Countries.index of is not a function. You sure? Countries.index of. Countries.index of is not a function.
Is not a spelling thing, count tires and countries.
Count tires. Then what is countries? Does countries exist? Oh, it's from somewhere else. We brought that in. Let's call this country names. That is one of my many common misspellings. Oh, is this actually going to work? Maybe this works. This is a very boring chart. CO2. Life. GDP. These are incredibly boring, perhaps to the degree of not being helpful. Maybe because they're too short.
I think they're just so gradual.
Yeah.
Like
These aren't things that change the time.
No, they're not seeing any peaks or anything. They're going to be. Yeah.
The real question is like, can we have it show the country name so that we get this correct? Perfect.
Excellent.
Yeah, select X max. I don't know. What don't you like? Missing channel X. It's right there. No, maybe we just. So I think we did it. It's just awful, both in implementation and what it looks like. Min X, and then yeah, nailed it. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Maya.
Next, anchor start.
Maya, I don't know if the notebook is shared for that yet, but definitely when the talk is, it'll be included with it.
What if instead of a line, maybe it'll look better if we do it as a bar Y? Are you gonna be mad at me for that? Ooh.
Huh. Does this have an opacity or something to it? Why is or is this the size that some of them look gray?
I think that they're just really short. It doesn't like doing bar Y with years. Okay, rect Y. No, bar Y with years is fine. It's just going to give us all the labels, which is a bit of a pain. Fine, we do rect Y and do the same thing that the histogram is doing. We just haven't been talking about it. X, Y count. rect y, bin x, y count, x year. Oh, but we don't want to count. We want to sum the GDP. Hey, look, the GDP of the US is getting bigger. And of China.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 6 is a better number for our grid. Maybe 8. You know, I just want to make an input.
Do it.
Nah. I wonder if we can say dy10, kind of move everything underneath it.
Mm.
And then we get all these things like the text is too long. So you can be like d dot country dot slice 0, 20. I just don't know why there's text like behind that for the United States.
Yeah, that's odd.
Oh, it's because we said select. It's using the minimum X value, and the minimum X value is actually up there.
Gotcha. Okay.
But that's not actually what we want to do.
Mm-mm.
What if for the Y value, what if we just put 0?
Yep.
There we go. I mean,
You can see some stuff.
it happened. I mean, that took 15 minutes, and like I've spent a lot of time writing plot. So
Yep.
This obviously isn't super easy out of the box to do this, but it was doable.
Yeah. Yeah, a little fiddling. This will
Oh,
be
fiddling.
meaningful.
FX. Are those FX things? We'll just say ticks null. Did that do what I wanted it to do? FY ticks null. All right, so we like got rid of those numbers on the side.
All right, we got 1202.
All right.
Oh, yeah, if you want to keep going with this, that's fine.
I really don't. This is a bit of a dead end. All right.
Hey.
So let's go back to
yeah,
planned content.
Yeah, you want to run through this first activity, Mike, and I can do the second one?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to duplicate the histogram above. That can't be too hard. And come up to this histogram. Looks like we've already split it out in cool ways, which is great. You can duplicate it with a keystroke. I also sometimes just like copying and pasting the content. I find it a bit easier to manage the cells depending on the other content of the notebook. So I can just add a JavaScript cell and put that in there. But we don't just want this to be constantly looking at life expectancy. We want a radio button for those 3 options. So I'll search for radio. And I'll call this, I don't know, like histvar, the variable that we want in the histogram. And we want it to be life or CO2 or GDP, select variable for histogram. We can be really explicit about it. And then the value can be life to start. I've done this a few times, but just notice this pin icon. If you're finding the code noisy, you can click it to unpin it, and then you can collapse the cell. Or I think also if you click into another code cell, that code will fold down for you. So it's a bit more ready for presentation. So here's selecting the variable, and then we basically just want to look in here for any time that we refer to life, that constant, and replace that with histvar. And it should, when we click this, automatically update. There's CO2, GDP, and life expectancy. We have a lot. I think we have like a wider distribution here for GDP and CO2. We can even just give me one. Let me do one, right? One radio input. Oh, you know what we could even do? We don't even need another radio input. We can say that when we are, for our X scale, we want the type to be if the histvar is equal to life, I think then we can have it be linear,
Linear,
otherwise it'd be log.
Yep. Oh, so
Oh, we want that for the Y scale.
CO2. Yeah,
Oh,
Well, I think we want it on the X scale, but on the X scale. No, I thought the first one made sense for X when his far is life.
here's something weird. What if we say sim log? So log scales really don't like zeros.
Right.
And a sim log scale is a yada, yada, yada math way of letting you have zeros.
Just wave past that one.
Yeah, definitely. All
Cool.
right. All right, you want to do this? Oh, horizontal bar plot showing the top 10. I love it.
Yeah, so essentially what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be manually creating a racing bar chart that Mike showed earlier. But we're going to be the one determining the point in the race. So we'll go ahead and add a skeleton for a horizontal bar plot. Yep. And here actually we don't even need this frequency. I'm going to change this, although Mike, I'm curious about this. If you just want the value, then I'm just going to put in like CO2 here instead of doing any sort of aggregation. So here I'm going to again be starting from WB data. Along the x-axis, I'm going to have CO2. On the y-axis, I'm going to have the country name. And we can see that we can create this, but we have all of these countries now. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a limit. So I'm going to set a limit here to 10. And then when I run this, then I only have the top 10, which is pretty cool. We can change some stuff. Yeah, if you, Mike's adding margin left, so you can actually see those names. They're really long. These are the long form names of some of these countries. But what you can see is also you see that there's these little breaks, and that's because there's the different years. So each of these countries has a different years worth of values. But what we're going to do is there you go. Thanks. That makes it clear. What we're going to do is we're going to make an input where we're just choosing any single year at a time. So that's not a concern for us. So I'm going to create a new slider input. Again, I'm going to use that D3 extent. Mike's coding here too on WB data, accessing just the year column. So the year, that's going to get me the minimum and maximum year values. So then we have our slider. Again, if we wanted it to start at 1997, we could use that value and set it to the D3 min. Yeah, thanks, Mike. So now we have this slider, but that's not connected to our data. We're going to create a new set, a subset of the data that I'll call maybe like, I don't know, bar race subset. And this I'm going to get from WB data filter. And I'm going to say I want to only choose values where the year matches my selected year. Does that look right?
Looks good to me. Only one way to find out.
All right, and then we're going to replace that WB data in our plot with that subset that we've created. And now when we use that slider, and there's no data for those final years in the data set, but you can see as I slide along these years that eventually up until 2004, the US is the biggest emitter.
They can't see you sliding. I got to slide.
Oh, thanks.
which is actually a huge point, right? Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so I'm sliding this on my screen. So Mike and I can interact separately with whatever is in the notebook. So I have mine at a different point. So you're not like restricted to a single person controlling what they see, which kind of allows more folks to explore the way they want to explore, all looking and working on the same notebook, which is cool. I mean, that's my take on it. Mike, what are your thoughts on that functionality?
I think that at some point there, confusion can emerge that you were like, oh, you can see I slid, right? Like you and I can look at different states of the notebook. If we both refresh the page, it will refresh the notebook. From like a technical side, one reason that we don't do that is we don't want every one of these events of sliding this to be in the history of the notebook, right? You can actually pop on over here and go back to any point in the notebook history. These unfortunately aren't the most expressive comments here, but we can scroll down and we can see, 2:08, an hour ago, this is what we had done, right? This is as far as we had gone, and we could revert to that, or we can just get out of this history viewer. But we don't want every time somebody slides the slider to them, like record that event and share it with everyone looking at the notebook. We wanted to provide some sort of way for people to interact and sort of have that localized. Wow, we've really done a lot in 2 hours. Look at all this.
I know. All right, so we made a racing bar chart.
Amazing.
Yeah, incredible. All right, so I think let's move on. So those are 2 examples. I don't see any questions on those in the chat. So, but yeah, send questions along that you have on those. Let's move on to tooltips, because this is something that quite a few people have asked about. Like, I want to hover on that section and have the name of the region pop up in that bar chart. So let's go ahead and do this. So like Mike said, this doesn't exist out of the box in Plot. What we've done is we have imported here from another notebook, this add tooltips function. Imports in Observable are really awesome. So Mike is showing at the bottom of the screen here, you can see a couple of imports. But you can see in the appendix, we have this line, import add tooltips from this notebook. And this makes that function available for us. This is pretty cool. You can also import charts, and like Mike was saying, it brings along the data with it, which seems pretty magical. So what's really nice about this is you can add tooltips by wrapping that around any existing plot code. So just use that function, add tooltips around the entire thing. And then you get to specify what shows up in those tooltips by adding a title to the mark that you want to have that tooltip associated with. Am I saying that right? I said that, but is that?
I think you said that right. I was also typing an answer to a question, but I think you said that right.
Okay, cool. So within where we're creating, let's say this plot bar X, adding a title where there is just adding the value of CO2. But you can also add those template literals. So you can also specify a little bit more in detail what you actually want to show up here. So Mike's writing out, I want to pull the country name, then it'll be the word omitted. So this is making a string for us, pulling from those JavaScript values, like you would if you were doing like inline referencing to our objects. And now we're going to have the country name omitted, and then the CO2 value, and then tons of CO2. And that's what's going to show up.
Undefined tons of CO2.
Undefined tons of CO2.
It's not C02, it's CO2.
Lowercase o.
Come on, third time's the charm.
There we go. And so, yeah, so now you can see you have your customized tooltips. You can also customize what they look like. So you can change like the fill color, et cetera, of those tooltips, but it's pretty nice for a quick interactive tooltip that you get to control. Oh, you're doing some customization here?
Fill, I don't know, red.
Cool. So you can see that's outside of the main plot code, but within the add tooltips is where that fill aesthetic is specified.
Yeah. Oh, and we have this great and astute question about importing from a particular commit of a notebook. Absolutely. So you can actually see on here, what is this icon? Dependencies. So we can see what this depends on, and we can even see which version it's depended on is version 661. I apparently have made 661 versions of this plot tooltip, which is just the length of the notebook history. At any point in that history, you can lock it. And And you can see that it, in fact, indirectly imports all these other things because other notebooks import these notebooks, like the, the table of contents or something else here, something from Xan. So here are these direct imports. And if you wanted to, you could say like plot tooltip at 660. And that's going to, that wasn't a good demo of that. Failed to load. I wonder why. 650. Maybe those weren't published for some reason. If we click on that, plot tooltip at 650. Here's plot tooltip. And if we look in the, I can't see the history because I'm not logged in on my personal account here. Thought that would have been how I did that. No problem.
Yeah.
I'm just doing some exploration over in another window at 650. Does that work? Yeah, interesting. Maybe those particular versions need to be published. I'm just looking in that notebook's history for a minute. Maybe it needs, to be like a formally published version. Looks like 659 exists. Let's see if that works. At 659, does that exist? Okay, so that works because I apparently, it was a private notebook and I published a sequential changes. So here, if we go to, let's start closing tabs. We don't need the cheat sheets right now in PDF or otherwise. Synchronized inputs are Caro or the data wrangling or the bar chart race. Oh no, did I just close the notebook we were working in? That's okay. I can just go home to Observable. And this is the completed one?
Yep.
Completed version. Great. So down here where we had tooltips, it looks like 659 was a published version. So that is the one that we can import. And you should be able, yes, Antoine, you should be able to import to Corto or anywhere else using those same version numbers. And what happens if I delete that notebook? I don't know. I think if I choose to delete that notebook, I think it'll damage the other notebooks, right? Notebooks that depend on it will be, will no longer have access to that. Right, if that notebook gets deleted, we don't have it anymore. But if you were worried about that, for example, you're like, this Mike guy seems very suspicious. What you can do is you can create a fork of the plot tooltip notebook, and then you can use your fork of that notebook. You can make changes to that. You want to change some customizations. You can always go to any notebook, right? Here's the plot tooltip one. This is hyperlinked, which is nice. And you could just say, I want to fork this notebook and make it my own, and then reference that version of plot tooltips instead of the one that Mike is maintaining because you don't trust me.
Diabolical.
Diabolical.
Take away tooltips from us.
I wouldn't. I'm just trying to get them. I'm trying to get them in for everyone. Yeah, and I don't remember what else I included in these tooltips. I feel like if there's a line break, there's some formatting in there. Again, I was like kind of opinionated about this, right?
I think the /n.
Thank you. /backslash.
Sorry, the other slash, whatever.
The other slash.
One.
Yeah, there we go. So, it is not that robust of a tooltip. It sort of has a default view like that. But you can choose like what happens to the thing underneath it, right? Mm-hmm. Those are tooltips. Now they exist, and they should work pretty well most of the time, right? So this is a like kind of a personal side attempt at getting tooltips to work, but I think that if there are any issues with them, you can leave a comment in the notebook. Notebooks have comments. You can be like, you just click that little and be like, hey, this is busted, Mike. Fix it. But said politely.
not sound like
right?
that.
And I would tend to that.
Cool. So I think maybe we'll do, since we only had this one in here, let's also add a tooltip to that stacked, or maybe another one of maybe the scatter plots. Yeah, maybe this one. So we'll go ahead and just use add tooltips.
Amazing. Is that it? Oh,
Yep. You got it? Okay.
That's it.
Cool.
Now we know what these are.
Perfect.
And you, of course, could add additional information about those places, but it works. And it even, I think, prevents you from going off to the side.
Oh, this is a good question. So in Observable, if you want to have Arcaro, like if you're thinking about piping through a sequence of data wrangling steps, Mike had shared that workbook or that notebook, and I can share it again here too, or Mike, if you want to drop it again, where you can use the dot syntax. You don't use a pipe, but you can string sequentially through steps where whatever the outcome of the previous wrangling step is, that's going to be what's input into the next step. So there are tools like Arcaro where it feels like you can work very similar to using pipe sequences.
Great. Do you actually mind dropping that again? I don't want to, I think my Slack might pop up over
Not
here.
at all.
And
yeah, I'll find it.
I would want everyone to see the funny GIFs that we send each other.
I got it. Data wrangling, there it is.
All right, so we got about 40 minutes left. And we definitely want to talk about sharing, and then we can talk about some advanced techniques, either about importing, about working with databases. So we'll start with sharing. I'll take a few minutes and talk about this, and then I have some ideas for this section, but we can also leave it open to questions. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it sounds good. There is one question, Robert, following up. Could you use a pipe equivalent with tooltips? My understanding of that is like, could you have your whole plot.plot statement and then like pipe into tooltips?
You can't. However, I did something else in this notebook, which was to redefine plot with this sort of built in. So if you just say import plot from there, plot's a built-in function or library in your notebook. But if you import plot from there, which should be the most recent version of plot, add tooltips doesn't exist anymore. I'll bring on those back in just a second. But if all you do, because that's in parentheses. What in the world is going on? Okay, there is just like that extra configuration there. Like now all you have to do is set the title, but what you lose is the configuration of like what happens to the visual mark behind the tooltip. Like if you say import plot from MK Freeman, it's always going to be this kind of light blue as the hovered element. But if you want to set the stroke or the fill or the opacity or something else, then you're going to have to do this add tooltips approach, which is what I'll leave in. Yeah, sadly, no piping. Yeah, no, there's sadly no like take this and pipe it into that. You got to kind of wrap things in other things. I haven't done this in a while, but if this feels busy to you and like the multiple layers of nesting, like this whole thing in here is just an object. So if you wanted to, you could say like plot object or whatever you want to call that is just this thing. Again, I got to wrap it in parentheses, which is a bit of a pain. So you can do that editing of the configuration. Maybe we'll call it plot config. And then you just say that you want to plot the plot config. Like maybe that feels a little bit less nested.
Yeah.
And Anthony, can you configure the bold and italics? You actually can't, but what you could do is you go to the plot tooltip notebook, you create your own fork of it. And then, here are some examples. I hope that they work. Here's one where it changes the radius when you hover. In the implementation, just a bunch of tests to see if these are working. You could come down and you could just look for like bold. Is that what it's going to be? Bold? Nope, bold. So here, style, font weight. If it's the first line, the 0th line, bold, otherwise normal. So you could come in here and you could just delete that line of code. You could make that italics. You could do anything else you want there.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is like the great thing is that the code and the feature, like it all lives side by side, right? So you can see how exactly this is done, and there's some kind of funny workarounds if it has a legend, because there are multiple SVG elements. Abhijit, how do you find cool stuff on Observable? That's such a great question. Allison, how do you find great stuff on Observable?
Yeah, so there's so much cool stuff. It's overwhelming. This is a thing that I struggle with, and is a great question. There are, if you have an account on Observable, there's like a trendings notebook section where you can see kind of what's popular and what a lot of people are engaging with. And there's a lot of cool stuff there a lot. So you can see, and you can see in that trending section, there's also like the most liked last month. So you can kind of see what other folks in the community have been highlighting or engaging with. This, I would say, there's so much cool stuff. And this is a very small proportion that's even gonna show up here. This is my go-to place, is in the trending section. There's also a search feature in Observable. That's where I spend a lot of time. That's also been really improving recently, how things are searched and found. So you can search for just like choropleth, and I'm sure a whole bunch of things would come up that you could find. Yep. So there is that nice search feature that'll bring up a whole bunch of notebooks where you can see folks' code for creating really beautiful stuff. But yeah, trying to narrow it down, there's so much cool stuff, it quickly becomes overwhelming, and I could spend just hours looking. But that's a cool thing to get to do too.
People we keep an eye on.
I keep an eye on Mike Freeman stuff.
Thank you. Though I've sadly been quiet in terms of notebooks I'm making. Phil, this is one of our colleagues who is one of the major contributors to Plot, and has just a whole bunch of cool stuff.
Yeah. All right.
Let's share some charts. Yeah.
Cool.
So I don't think we need to, we've talked about faceting already.
Yep.
I want to grab two things. So maybe this, like, where's that slider? Here we go. We've got tooltips. We've got a slider. We've got this chart. Is my notebook? It should be published. I shouldn't have to republish it, I don't think. Some of these processes have changed a bit. But if I really like this, and I want to, oh no, why can't I embed you? Aha, it should give me a little message if I hold my mouse there for like 3 seconds. It says name this cell to embed it. Okay, that doesn't seem so hard. Just like any other JavaScript cell, I can put a name at the front. I can also put that name down here at the bottom. If this is, my scatter chart, is that. Try again. Aha, we want to embed this. So let's say, you really like this chart, but you don't need someone to see the whole notebook. You could grab whichever pieces of the notebook that you want, and you can download a runtime for JavaScript or React. If you're a React developer, that's awesome. If you're someone who just wants to share this, you can actually just copy this URL. And here it is. You just have a website with just those pieces that you've selected. This is a short section, end of demo, right, of that embedding, right? Grab the things that you want, put them over here. There you go. Questions, comments, concerns?
That's it.
That's it. So, this is helpful, right? You want to build a dashboard, you want to build a whatever. You use your notebook more like Scratchwork. You just want to share out a little piece, like you can grab those things.
Yeah, it's super nice.
All right, we got 30 minutes left. We have some advanced techniques and next steps that we could talk about. Also happy to answer some questions. So I see one here. Does the data still remain publicly accessible to the reader or easily downloadable? In the embedded version, I mean, it's certainly like accessible. Like this isn't, from a data security standpoint, like, people can see this. So yeah, beware.
Yeah, I just want to ask the question because, on the notebook, there's literally a attachment thing that you can literally download it from.
Right.
So it's not as easy, but you can still go back and find it, essentially is the point.
Exactly. There's probably some sort of way. I don't know exactly what it would be, but if folks haven't noticed, there's like next to any JavaScript cell like this, you can just download a CSV right there. So the data is quite easy to grab. All right, so we had, a couple ideas of things that we could do here for looking at databases in the browser, at looking at some maps, at, I didn't try doing the bar chart race, so I'm a little hesitant to do it here, but we can kind of play with imports a little bit and some particular charts. Any strong opinions or preferences from folks in the chat?
Since I unmuted myself once, I'll try it again.
Yeah.
When you are, so is there a way, so suppose we're doing like a quarter document or whatever, does all the connections happen with observable.com, or can we have a sort of a private observable within the firewall, so to speak, of a company or of an organization?
That's a good question. So you can, when you export something, this, that doesn't have a name, but this has a name, right? You choose to embed something. When you download the runtime, this is going to give you like a JavaScript bundle that I believe runs only locally on your machine, right? That isn't going to touch observablehq.com in any way. So if you want to create something on Observable in this way and then download it as a JavaScript bundle and then use it in your other development work, that is like a totally feasible process to go through.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a general question. I'm in pharma, and I know there's probably other people in pharma because this is our pharma conference. Yeah. And data is precious, right? And it needs to stay sequestered appropriately, right? Because it's competition, it's private stuff, and so that's I think one of the general questions that I think has to be addressed in this forum, right, or in this audience.
Yeah, and I'll invite if anyone has more detailed follow-up questions about privacy, security. I don't think either of us are great people to answer those questions, but we have our email addresses in the slides, and we'll put them here. Feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to put you in touch with the right folks. And we're still a young company. We love learning what people need to do their work. So we'd be, our customer success people will be stoked to talk to you about that.
Yep.
Yeah, basically in chat, one asked the same question I did essentially. So it's an industry question more than anything else. In that you have to keep the data private, or at least within a firewall. It can't go out into servers and like. So we're also concerned with things like Plotly for the same reason, because it used to be everything went out to the Plotly servers, and they've stopped that. But that question comes up over and over again in the industry.
Yeah, I would love to put you in touch with good people to answer this question. I think one way that people do it on smaller teams or with clients or customers is that they create observable teams and add people to those teams. So only the people within that team can view the notebooks. Because right now there's the opportunity for you all to view this notebook publicly. We also have this concept of like unlisted. So now our Pharma Complete will show up in observable search. It'll be indexed for Google search. Unlisted means that you would have to have the URL to be able to find it, which might be a random slug or string of characters.
So this is a good question. Don't the OJS cells reach out to Observable HQ, or are they local? If you're importing, I think that imports from Observable HQ. If you just have like plot code in an OJS cell, I don't think that it's reaching out to Observable HQ to run that. I think it's running on an OJS engine that Quarto has made possible. Is my understanding. But again, like security questions, I'm with Mike. Like, yeah, would love to put you in touch with, the customer success team.
Yeah, and like something we haven't talked about is that you can connect directly to SQL databases. Apparently none are connected here to this Teams account. I actually think that they're disabled by default because this notebook is public. So we wouldn't be able to connect to a SQL database here, but we, internally we connect to a Snowflake database and a MySQL server and a Postgres server and load those results into Observable. And like the only thing that Observable is storing are basically your select statements, but not any of the results that would be streaming in from the databases. So that is, I think that's like one form of security measure, is that we don't actually see any of that data, right? The data gets streamed into your browser instance, but we don't actually see that in that case, is my understanding. Browser instance, but we don't actually see that in that case, is my understanding.
All right.
What do you think we should do, Allison? We got like 20 minutes.
I think the Choropleth was pretty cool, but I also think DuckDB stuff is pretty cool. But if we don't have a database, you could still make one from, let's do it. Okay, this is really cool.
And we might be able to bring these things together.
Yeah. Cool.
So let's say, is there anyone, like raise your hand in the chat that uses SQL a lot? Like, are people SQL users? Maybe not. Sounds like a lot of, all right, I see some thumbs up. So for people that are SQL users, that is I think, kind of exciting entry point here.
Yeah.
So we can make a database in the client using this functionality called DuckDB, which will create a DuckDB database. And we can make it of either some file attachments, or we have these variables, one called WB data. And the other thing we had in here is this country codes file attachment. So I think we can actually grab this one and say like codes is that. Let's see if we get the syntax right on this. All right, so if we did it right, now this SQL cell, better yet, let's put in a data table cell. Data table cell is kind of like a SQL cell, but for sort of automatically giving you a table here. We have two tables, one for codes, one for World Bank data. And we should see the same data here, but with some fun bonuses. Like we have the distributions at the top, and selfishly, I worked on these, so I think that they're exciting, but you can see, the proportions that are in each one of these income groups, and you can look at the histograms of the continuous variables, hover over and see what these different values are, see how often a value is null. So even just having this in a database format gives us access to this, which I guess is being recorded. I think that this will be available without this intermediary step, I think in the very near future, probably by the time this talk is released. So you can do some basic operations here, but we can also take a look at that other data set, which just has these country codes and their integer IDs. And we can browse these schemas over here just by clicking this little database button, and we can see sort of what the types are and of each of these columns in the variable in the data set. So the tricky thing is that if we want to make a choropleth map, so we can look over at this example. A great way to recreate something is just make your data look like this data. And here, the challenge is that in the data, each one of the countries has a name, and matching by name can be quite challenging, all sorts of capitalization issues or spacing, full name, short name. But this data set also has an ID associated with each country, sort of a numeric ID that we can try and leverage. We've got to join that onto our data set, which should be doable in SQL, though my SQL is admittedly not super strong. But if this is our database, I think we can say select star from World Bank _ data. It should just give us back Froome. All right, so it gives us back the same thing here. But I want to be able to left join on the codes data. Nope. Left join codes is the name of that other codes on, maybe we have to give these World Bank data dot country code is equal to codes dot country code. Did that work?
Hey.
All right. So now each one of these has a number at the end. And for people who are SQL users, like this is a super powerful pattern, because you don't have to know anything about JavaScript anymore, and you don't have to learn Arcaro, the dplyr of the web. Like you can just say, make my CSV file into a database, and now I can do all of my joins and filters and order bys and whatever else you want to do. So we've got this, and if we want to recreate this map over here, we can see that it exports this function that you pass in some data and then some configurations. So I'll just copy those over. Of course, we don't have anything called hail. We need to give this a name. So I'll call this, I don't know, joined data. Maybe map data makes more sense. Call this map data. And importantly, we're going to identify each one of these countries by d.id, and we're just going to make it a number, because these IDs are actually like 3-digit, 004, 00 something. And then down here, rather than use d.properties.name, we just say d.id. Aw, that was close. Value d.hail. We don't have any d.hail, health adjusted life expectancy. We have d.life. Thought that was going to be it. What is this called? That's called ID. Okay. Feature ID is d.id, features countries, and d.life. Oh, plus sign. Nope. Plus sign over here. Plus signs everywhere. That's closer.
Closer. Yeah. There's really thus because life is so similar. Tough to change the scale.
That's so strange. Is there like a domain? Domain. Oh. We ran into this problem the other day. Map data, this has all of the years, right? We don't want all of the years.
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah.
We can say, where year equals 2019. Hey, look at that. We got a map.
So cool.
And of course, now, like, this is almost tacky at this point, but if we want to choose the map bar, we can, give it life or GDP or CO2 or population. And the value can be life. Unpin that cell. And instead of returning d.life, we just want map var to be there. And now we can choose what we show in our map.
God, that's rewarding to see. So cool.
That's great. And like, we didn't have to write this function, obviously.
Yeah.
Can you connect to cloud resources? That's a good question. I know that we can connect to cloud files in public notebooks. I know that works with Microsoft servers, and you can also integrate with Google Drive, so you can load in a Google Sheet. I'm not sure about loading something directly from Amazon. And yeah, you can definitely use the SQL table to filter and reflect in a plot. So this is on the hope list. I don't want to make any promises, but we do want some more interactive filtering here. But we can actually, with a table cell, right? Here's the data table cell, and look at the World Bank data. So let's say you want to do your filtering here, where the year is equal to 2019. Right, so that should just be our 2019 data. And so delightfully tells us that there. You call this, plot data. And then you can use this below here, right? So, make another scatter plot of plot data looking at year and, I don't know, life expectancy. Well, we don't want year because year is always 2019. That plot is awful.
Cool.
Population and life expectancy, and then you can come up here and change this.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And if you want to if you really want to go down this rabbit hole with me, let's call this view of year is, or call it SQL year is inputs dot slider. Nope, that doesn't exist. Inputs dot range of the extent of the World Bank. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. We've done this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've done this. This is why using the templates is good, right? Because it already has like step one. Check this out, SQL year. You can put this directly into your SQL query. And then you can use the slider to change your query.
That's cool.
Boom, nice one.
Yeah, it's amazing how this like makes data exploration like quick and fun and interactive.
It's just cool. Look at all that we've done. And we obviously came in with like a nicely structured data set and prior knowledge, but we, like, a lot of this code we wrote at the pace of something folks could follow along with, and hope that it was in a way that we can return to this and see that these these options aren't actually that complex to configure. And yeah, I guess returning, like, Allison, do you want to kind of frame like reconnect back to that question of like, how does this fit within your analysis work that you're already doing? Like you're an expert R user, like now you've just done this, like how would you see integrating this into your R analysis flow?
Yeah, I think for me, like it two steps really. It's like after I've gotten data cleaned up enough that I think I'm going to be able to explore it visually, then taking that over to Observable is an awesome way to be able to like explore it more quickly in more ways, I think, than maybe I would have, or that I would have had like way too many horribly faceted plots or not taking the time to add interactivity to be able to explore it the many different ways that I should before I start doing modeling and analysis. So I think in the exploratory phase, it's really powerful. And then after doing data analysis modeling, I think for like the final visualization prep stage, this gives you some pretty cool control over visualization that you want to create and share on the web. So I think in those two steps, both in data exploration and analysis and in the final visualization. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, ditto. Basically, one question from Abhijit was, what about model diagnostics? And I think just exporting the models, right? You can export whatever the data is to make your rock curves, and you can export your like predicted and your actual, or you can, I think that those are like pretty well structured as data frames already. I know that Broom does a lot of that. I feel like I haven't used that a ton, but you can, yeah, you can export those as a CSV and just drag and drop them up here as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think modeling, my modeling will still happen in R, is still a place for that. So yeah, Quarto, Broom is awesome. Yeah, and there are some packages for modeling. There's TensorFlow.js if you're doing more involved ML stuff, but for most of the stuff that I do are for modeling and stats, and then can bring it over here to Observable for some of the exploration and viz. How do you define a custom or manual scheme for your colors? Yeah, maybe we can just change this scheme as in one of these as an example.
Yeah, I had a notebook. It's like something that you often say. I had a notebook. There's a whole cheat sheet. So there is a plot cheat sheet about colors, which basically breaks down that you have whatever your data domain is, and you're mapping that to a visual range. Oh, animated scale diagram. I had one, like I just liked this as an explanation of like what scales are. Just like you have, your data is in some sort of data space, and scales are like the three scales are functions that translate that data domain to a visual range. And this is just for no particular reason, like an animation with a transition button to show that these functions are doing that translation from data space to pixel space. And in plot, you can specify either that data domain or that visual range. But I cut you off. Were you suggesting that we do some particular something?
No, as in one of our graphs, if we could show the color, a different color scheme that's manually set. I think you had shown one before that was like blues and yellows, just to show you don't have to use the built-in color schemes. Yeah.
Yeah, range, color, visual range, yellow, red. And just gonna alternate between the two of those, which isn't super helpful. But then again, this isn't super helpful for the the country anyways. There aren't any current plans to embed R or Python, and yeah, you can totally do RGB and hex, and basically any way that you can write a color, you can write a color. But there are ways to do observable in Python. There's this observable Jupyter package. I haven't done this very much. Oh man, 1:30 a.m.
I know. Thanks for joining us.
I was gonna say, we're leading this. I'm having trouble staying awake.
3 hours is a stretch, no matter what time.
Yeah. There were some cool notebooks about Python where people kind of hacked things together. Hacking observables, new cell nodes to run Python. So well, Juan, you'll have to make your girlfriend some charts to make it up to her. Yeah, I think we're kind of winding down. We closed out those slides. I think they just had like our contact information at the end.
Yeah.
We probably just said thanks.
Yeah.
I'll put these in the chat here. But really do truly feel open to reach out with follow-up questions.
Yep.
Oh, that's better.
There we go. And those are our Twitter handles. If you're still on Twitter, that's where we are.
Yeah.
All right.
Beautiful. Well, Allison, I got to thank you for jumping into this. I know you've only been here a few months. This is just an absolute blast to do this together.
So fun. Thank you. I learned a ton. Yeah, I learned so much in this workshop too. This is great.
And just a huge thanks to everyone that, taking your time. I know time is limited, taking your time to be here. Hopefully this was some fun ways of looking through some tools that you can use in the future. Yeah.
Please feel free. Thanks so much for joining us. Please feel free to reach out. There's also a new Observable community Slack. So yeah, we can send out hopefully to participants a way to get a hold of us. But otherwise, yeah, just reach out. Yeah, and hopefully there's some observable art soon.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks everyone. Enjoy your afternoons or your mornings and your weekends, and appreciate your time.